the MS Michigan Man 64 podcast. My name is Brian Wallace, and I am the MS Michigan Man 64. The MS Michigan Man 64 podcast is about chronic disease awareness. I have had multiple sclerosis for the last 27 years. It's an invisible chronic disease that I've been battling for half of my life. I want to share with you what it is like living with the chronic disease from my experiences and the experiences of other chronic disease warriors. We can fight to have a voice to those that want to listen. Together, we can motivate and educate. Hi, and welcome back to the MS Michigan Man 64 podcast. Today, I am sitting down with an MS warrior from down south in Texas. I met Jonathan on TikTok a couple months ago, and we kind of developed a relationship online, just talking with each other about our MS journey. He's newer into his diagnosis. He got diagnosed in 2021, but he wanted to come on just to help me spread awareness about what it's like living with this disease. Please welcome to the podcast, Jonathan. How you doing today, Jonathan?
How's it going, Brian? Glad to be here. Thank you for the invite.
Oh, I appreciate you coming on here and talking to me, Jonathan, because like I said, I met you a couple months ago. And your story is unique. I mean, you're everybody's different in their journey, and I think that the more that we talk about our journey, the better that people will understand what it's like living with a chronic disease. So I wanted to ask you, buddy, when you got diagnosed in 2021, can you kind of take us through what kind of symptoms you were going through that led up to your diagnosis? Because I know that you were pretty established in life. You were 39 years old, and you were working in the construction industry for, well over 20 years. And that's when your life just like came to a whirlwind tornado hit it. So can you kind of just take us through that moment in your life, buddy?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. I consider that moment, and I refer to that moment as the wall, as me hitting the wall, because I literally hit the wall, and I physically hit the wall, with medical stuff. But yes, yes, yes. What it was is, coming from a construction background all my life in one shape or another. I was in construction, working outside in the elements and the heat down here in Texas. That's saying something. And sure enough, I began just writing off and just explaining away, my being lethargic or being very tired. The fatigue and the drop foot was happening and something, and I would say, "Oh, I'm just tired. I slept wrong. Oh, I pulled a muscle." I even spent time. I mean, I going to different chiropractors, different masseuses to try to get whatever worked out.
Yeah.
And sure enough, it finally happened that I end up having an accident when I'm driving home, and I severe fatigue. I pass out driving, and I and I wrecked my truck. I totaled my truck in stop and go traffic, and my son was with me. And I was like, wait, hang on, because I had been dealing with this already for a few years already, dealing with the symptoms. When I finally paid them enough mind to look into them, and my having my son with me in that time, that really pushed me over the edge to finally go to the hospital.
Wow.
And when I went to the hospital, sure enough, I didn't even have a PCP, so I didn't know. I just went to the emergency. They admit me for a possible stroke because of my just of how my mobility, all the issues that I was having.
Sure.
Um, that was like on a Monday. On a Wednesday, I have the head of neurology for the hospital saying, standing at the foot of my bed and saying, "Yeah, you have multiple sclerosis."
Wow, man.
And
What what was your knowledge of MS back then at 39 years old? I mean, you're 39 years old and you got a doctor sitting at the foot of your bed telling you you have MS. Did you even know what MS was back then?
L- No, I did not know anything about MS really. My one of my first three questions to to the doctor was, "What is MS? Didn't I give money to some MS Society thing recently? And how do I get rid of this?" That's how little I knew about the disease.
Yeah.
Uh, uh, when I was diagnosed, and sure enough, and my journey definitely continued from that point, or began from that point. And with a lumbar puncture later on that week to confirm my diagnosis. And the doctor at that point, I remember he was so confident in his diagnosis that he's like, "Yeah, well, that's just going to confirm." He goes, he goes, "We won't even keep you in the hospital for that. Here, they just pump you with steroids and, look into getting a neurologist." I literally didn't even have a PCP.
Yeah.
So just a whirlwind
Wow.
that was occurring. Uh, and
I
yeah,
couldn't imagine what you're going through. Like I said, I mean, you're already established in your life. It just had to be your head had to be spinning out of control. John, tell me like how did you accept that mentally? I mean, you're sitting there 39 years old, you got a young you got kids, you got a career. How did you handle that the mental part of it?
I had a career. I had a career that I loved. I had, of course, my children were young and, 12, 14, and 16 at the time. And I was an active part of their lives. I would actively, there was a time that I was drop them off from school and pick them up from school every day. I was that, and I was on track to really, on track with the goals that I had set for my life at that point. I was like, look, I'm gonna be getting into construction. I'm gonna be doing this and but whatnot. And I was hitting all these milestones on time and going. And then all of a sudden, I go from working and being a workaholic to not being able to hold a fort, not being able to get out of the bed. And I would consider it a great day when I would walk 30 steps a day.
Yeah.
And it was tough. It was tough because now I'm getting set there and I'm having to figure out what is multiple sclerosis, what is optic neuritis, what is this, what is that, the things that I never paid attention to before. Now I'm having to quickly learn. And back then, at that time, for me, I didn't have a support system to per se that really. I had Google, I had WebMD, and sometimes those things can be, very difficult to deal with.
Yeah, there
But
some things you read are kind of dark and like they take you to a bad place, and I just like I can't stand doing that. I try not to do it, but I know it's hard not to do it. But I know when you said you found your community, and I know that that is so important, and it's just so awesome that you found it as quick as you did too, John. Because, when I got diagnosed when I was 27, man, I didn't want to talk to anybody about this disease. And I wanted to be alone with it. And I think it was a mistake, but I mean, it was the way that I dealt with it. But it is such a help when you do find that community because the mental part of this disease is the toughest part, in my opinion. What you got but like in your situation, you're 39 years old and you got your career going, and now everything's coming to a halt, and you still got kids. I mean, you got parts of your family or parts of your life that are still going on, and you can't contribute the way you want to, and I know that affects the mental health part of it. And and that's a part that I just think that people just don't understand.
it is very challenging for those, especially that first, when you're first diagnosed, to really understand your limits, really understand and see how you're going to function correctly in your day-to-day life. and it's such a drastic change from what it was before, and that all affects your mentality and your mindset. um I'm not gonna lie, it got dark. It
Hmm.
gets dark, and it was tough. And be especially coming from a culture where men didn't really talk to each other about their problems.
Hmm.
You know, we don't really express what's really going on, and we're always wondering, "Okay, if I confide in this person, is it something that they're going to try to use against me?" At least that was the mentality that that was happening on this side.
Hmm.
So
Yep.
finding the community, I found my community about a year and a half into my journey. I started coming around to seeing what was out there. But for that first year and a half was so tough because it was just me. I mean, my family, they were there, but they're like, they sent me so many uh treatments and so many things, and maybe you should try this diet, and
Yeah.
maybe this, and maybe this treatment, and maybe you got to purge yourself of this, and
And
all
that
these different
and
items.
And that part's hard on our mental health too, because we're the one that's going through it and we're new to it, and then we got family who we know that they love us. I mean, there's no doubt about it that they love us, and they're hurting that we're hurting, but they don't understand that it's not as easy as rub a little bit of dirt on it and you're going to be okay. This is a chronic disease, and you're going to have good parts of the day. You're going to have bad parts of the day. You might have a bad week. You might have a bad month. But and the family is the hardest part to get to understand that.
Yes, because they still see the Brian of before, the John Ford of before, the person that we were before. That's who they have ingrained in their mind. And it's hard for them to transition and say, that's not him no more. There's something going on. He's dealing with a different challenge. And so much more harder for us to understand and our new limitations. I went from going to a cookout every weekend, and it was just a matter: are we having the cookout over my spot, or are we having the cookout over your spot? To now, it's like, oh, being in the room sometimes would be too much. Be too so many conversations and everything was going. And even if it wasn't for me, it was still a lot to deal with. And understanding, coming to terms that I had to limit myself as much as possible, or protect my peace as much as possible. And that's definitely a thing that I had to learn the more and more once I got to once I found our community. um, I definitely heard how important that was, and I was making sense, and it definitely helped me come to terms and come to peace with my own diagnosis and being able to share that with others, with be it my family, be it the stranger in the grocery store, if need be, just various times, and being comfortable with that.
Yeah.
And part of that is coming to terms with it.
Yeah, absolutely, man. And all these little pieces and parts of this disease, I mean, they're all battles. They're all battles that we have to kind of customize and figure out on our own. Because my way might not be the way that you would use it to get over a hurdle, but it might be good for me. And just same thing. Like you might use something that might be good for you. It's just such a customizable disease and a path. No, there's no one path to this disease. And the other thing that I wanted to ask you is, just to talk a little bit about, what this thing did to your career. I'm going to go back to the career again because I think this is another thing that just people just don't understand. I mean, you go from making X amount of dollars to not being able to work, and just how that affects the mental part of it, and just how it affects our lives. I mean, we lose houses over this, and just talk a little bit about that.
You know, I at the time, I had three teens at the house, and they love to eat me out of his house and home, the whole 9 yards. And I had already established quality of life for them in that type of situation. That the finances, when I got sick, their life continued, and that kept on going. So it was difficult when I had to start making concessions and started saying, "Oh, well, this is not needed, this is not important," and you go through that process, and it's definitely it was definitely a situation where it's a change of perspective and a change of mentality of how to spend money. I went from at the original when I originally got diagnosed, I'm over here having to Uber everything, having to, you know, it was just that type of deal, and I blew through funds
Hmm.
so fast, and it's one of those things that I wish I go back and I would definitely take back so much stuff that I took for granted. That I would be like, oh, like just Uber, it'll be all right, just Uber, or whatever the case may be. And it was and I got to the point where now I went from living somewhat comfortably. Of course, everybody desires more and keeps growing and whatnot. And I
Hmm.
was on pace to do that.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, I'm hit with this. I hit the wall, and I'm in the situation about a year after my diagnosis, about a year and a half after my diagnosis, actually. I had already rehabbed myself to the point where I made myself believe that I was ready to go back and to try to go back to work. And I tried to go back and work, and that experiment ended like a year and a half later, and it ended up me being let go and whatnot. And really it ended when I finally had to come to terms with I can no longer keep up. My mental fog, my mental, is not able to keep up with that. I'm not physically be able to go out there because to the construction job sites and things like that nature. But even this back office stuff was difficult to deal with. So I had to come to peace with I'm not able to work anymore.
Yeah.
And that changed drastically.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's another part of the mental game too, because we all want to contribute in society and earn a living, and like you said, do good, do nice things for the family and all that, and it just kind of gets swept out from under you when you get hit with this disease, and then on top of that, you're disabled and you can't even get out of a bed, and you're filing for disability, and then you got the in the United States, you got the federal government, they turn you down, and it's like a 3 year process. You got to fight with them just to get approved for something that you paid into your whole life.
Yeah, disability is I'm still on that battle myself. I'm on my second try, though I got denied the first time. And I'm trying to, working on getting it squared away. All that to say, I remember when I went to my first neurologist visit, and I remember her asking me if I was going to go after my disability because she said, "Yeah, you have everything that I'll write the letter this afternoon and I'll send it." And I immediately said, "Dad, don't worry about it. I'm not. I'll be back. I'll rehab and get better and get back to work." Little did I know the gravity. That's how little I knew about the disease at that point.
Yeah.
And yeah, and it's interesting that this country definitely has something that makes it so difficult for us to access the funds, our funds that we paid into the system and whatnot. But I encourage everyone to keep pressing on and keep fighting and
Yeah.
keep doing what they can
Yeah. I
to
mean,
get that out of Social Security better.
yeah, I mean, and like I mean, my battle with Social Security, I paid into PERS because I worked for the state of Ohio, so it was a little bit different. I didn't pay into Social Security like everybody else. Uh, and so when I went out on my disability is through the state of Ohio, and when I filed with the feds for SSI for Medicare, they denied me. They said I wasn't disabled enough, and I'm sitting here reading the letter, going, how fucking disabled do they want me to be? I've had this disease for 27 years, and I can barely walk. I have to use a wheelchair, a cane, a walker. I'm like, how disabled do they want me to be? And I appealed it, of course, and I won it on my first appeal. But I'm just like, it's just mind boggling that we got our federal government, over here in the United States, and we got people that their lives are upside down, and they have to fight just to get a little bit of money.
Yes. Yes, yes, yes. It's also one of those things that that affects it, it affected me mentally as well. It's like it seemed like I was like, man, am I gonna have to beg for my own money? And it's just one of those situations. And it's not that, but the perception inside our mind sometimes may be that as men is like, man, I really don't want to I have a handout, but that isn't really a handout. That's you accessing your funds. And I encourage everyone that's doing this to definitely
Keep fighting it.
continue on.
Yeah,
But
keep
yeah,
on
continue
fighting.
on with the truth.
Keep
Keep
on
on fighting.
fighting it.
Keep on. Yeah, keep on fighting because it is definitely a necessary evil, but it's well worth.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, like you said, like I said, I mean, we paid into it, and it's just sad that
Yeah.
we end up having to fight for it in the end. But it's just the way the system's set up. I mean, it's just another part of the system that's broke. Let me ask you this, John. I want to flip to when you got diagnosed. I know you said you had three kids. How did your kids understand this disease? Because they went from their dad that was in great shape, and he was a construction worker, and he can pretty much do anything you wanted to do, to a dad now with a chronic disease. And so, how did they process that being like teenagers when you went through your diagnosis?
It was hard. It was difficult. It's been difficult at times, and they're still doing it because in the same way we have to grieve our old selves, they have to grieve the old dad that used to be there at their.
You're disabled, and you can't even get out of a bed, and you're filing for disability, and then you got the in the United States, you got the federal government, they turn you down, and it's like a 3 year process. You got to fight with them to get just to get approved for something that you paid into your whole life.
Yeah, disability is. I'm still on that battle myself. I'm on my second try, though I got denied the first time. Um, and I'm trying to, working on getting it squared away. All that to say, I remember when I went to my first neurologist visit, and I remember her asking me if I was going to go after my disability because she said, yeah, you have everything that, I'll write the letter this afternoon and I'll send it. And I immediately said, Dad, don't worry about it. Dad, I'll be back. I'll rehab and get better and get back to work. Little did I know the gravity. That's how little I knew about the disease at that point.
Yeah.
And yeah, and it's interesting that this country definitely has something that makes it so difficult for us to access our funds that we paid into the system and whatnot. But you know i I encourage everyone to keep pressing on and keep fighting and
Yeah.
keep doing what they can
Yeah. I
to
mean,
get the social security back.
yeah, I mean, and like I mean, my battle with Social Security, I paid into PERS because I worked for the state of Ohio, so it was a little bit different. I didn't pay into Social Security like everybody else. Uh, and so when I went out on my disability is through the state of Ohio, and when I filed with the feds for SSI for Medicare, they denied me. They said I wasn't disabled enough, and I'm sitting here reading the letter, going, how fucking disabled do they want me to be? I've had this disease for 27 years, and I can barely walk. I have to use a wheelchair, a cane, a walker. I'm like, how disabled do they want me to be? And I appealed it, of course, and I won it on my first appeal. But I'm just like, it's just mind-boggling that we got our federal government, over here in the United States, and we got people that their lives are upside down, and they have to fight just to get a little bit of money.
Yes. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes. It's also one of those things that that affects it. It affected me mentally as well. It's like it seemed like I was like, man, am I gonna have to beg for my own money? And it's just one of those situations. And it's not that, but the perception inside our mind sometimes may be that as men is like, man, I really don't want to I have a handout, but that isn't really a handout. That's you accessing your funds. And I encourage everyone that's doing this to definitely
Keep fighting it.
continue on.
Yeah,
But
keep
yeah,
on
continue
fighting.
on with
Keep
keep
on
on fighting,
fighting.
keep on, yeah, keep on fighting because it is definitely a necessary evil, but it's well worth.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, like you said, like I said, I mean, we paid into it, and it's just sad that we end up having to fight for it in the end. But it's just the way the system's set up. I mean, it's just another part of the system that's broke. Let me ask you this, John. I want to flip to when you got diagnosed. I know you said you had three kids. How did your kids understand this disease? Because they went from their dad that was in great shape and he was a construction worker and he can pretty much do anything you wanted to do, to a dad now with a chronic disease. And so, how did they process that being like teenagers when you went through your diagnosis?
So each one of my children handled it in a very individual way. My daughter definitely dealt with it, and she became distant for a while. Um, she was 16 at the time, 15, 16 at the time of my diagnosis of when all this was coming to terms or come to play. And sure enough, and she became a little bit distant. So my 19-year-old son became a little bit, well, he was 16 at the time and uh 15 at the time. And then my 12-year-old was kind of distance, and they all didn't know how to deal with a dad that went from very involved to now somebody that he himself was visibly having issues,
Right.
and that became difficult. Uh,
Kids have a hard time processing, especially like when your kids were already teenagers. When my kids were young, because I didn't have kids when I got diagnosed when I was 27, but when in '99 I had my son, and then I had my daughter in '01. Um, when my kids were getting older and they were like toddlers, I tried to kind of introduce them to the MS, and they would actually help me push the syringe down on my DMT, just to kind of like let them know, hey, dad's got something wrong. But it's still, even with doing that as young kids, it still got harder as they got older. So I think that teenage year, I mean, just for them to get that thrown on them, that's a hard thing. I couldn't even imagine a 13-year-old, being told, hey, my dad has MS, and they probably didn't even understand what MS was either. They were learning on their own too.
100%, 100%, and so much so that they would ask some general questions at time, but very, very few and very far between. It wasn't until my daughter came over for one weekend and I realized that it was a little bit, you know how you can tell when your daughter has or when kids have something in them that they're just working up the nerve to ask.
Hmm.
And my daughter finally came in. I remember this was around year three of my journey. And I'm longing for the connection. I'm longing for that relationship with her to continue to improve. I'm definitely a dad that was very involved with my daughter, and sure enough, she asked me one day, and she came in that day and asked me a question that I had been longing for a while. Maybe I didn't know exact what way she was going to ask it, but I was longing for that to be reached across. And she asked, she goes, I know what multiple sclerosis is generally, but I'm wanting to know what multiple sclerosis means to you, Dad. And that opened up a communication that is still holds true to this day. Whenever we talk and we conversate, there's times that we can conversate, and then I have to dad, and of course because I still got a parent, but there's other times where we will be able to have very candid conversations, and we're like, how's your mental fog? How's this going on? And we're able to have those conversations. And in a similar fashion, I've had to have in those individual conversations and communications with my all three of my kids, my 19-year-old, my 16-year-old. And in the midst of all this, we still have to parent. We still have to be, and now we just have to find a different way to modify our way of impacting their lives
Right.
and impacting them. So, yes, sir.
Yeah, absolutely, man. That's part of this journey, because even today, I have a 26-year-old and a 23-year-old, and I think both of my kids process this disease differently, because I can talk to my daughter a lot more openly, and she's the younger one, 23-year-old. I can talk to her a lot more openly about this disease than I can with my 26-year-old son. And it's just because they're different, and I have to accept that. I have to accept that, that my son doesn't want to talk about the disease because that's his personality. And I get it. It doesn't mean that he doesn't love me. I understand that. But we have to accept the way that other people kind of understand the disease, if that makes sense.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. We have to find a way to not only learn and educate ourselves, but find a way to introduce and communicate what we're dealing with and what we're going with to our loved ones, to our caregivers, to the people that surround us, our friends, our community that's there. And sadly, more often than not, sometimes those people do not know how to reach across us. They think that, them saying, oh, well, we're gonna send you this diet that's real good, and we're gonna send you this cleanse that's real good. And they may mean well, but sometimes it's one of those issues where we're having to learn to in ourselves navigate bad situations as well as like
Yep. Yeah.
and it's hard, it's difficult to deal with at times.
Yeah, absolutely it is. Yeah, absolutely. So let me ask you this, John, do you have to use any kind of mobility aids? And if you do, did you struggle having to use them? Because I know I did, and I was just curious if you did.
I remember when the doctor when the doctor diagnosed me, at that same time the technician brought in my walker to the room, and very much I remember staring at it and looking at it and being, wow, am I going to be walking with a walker now? Is that the type of situation that I'm in? And it was such a difficulty for me to even accept using that, and let alone when I went to using a cane, even walking, I was like, I'm 39 years old. How does it, I mean, it's not even like a Halloween costume pimp cane. I'm over here actually using a cane, and I'm struggling to use it the right way and use it correctly. It was such a challenge to overcome that part of it.
Yeah.
uh, I'm using forearm crutches now, to help me walk longer distances and from day to day use. But because due to all the three relapses that I've had, it's just gotten me to that point.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, it was such a mental challenge. Even today, I mean, when I nowadays when I go grocery shopping, I remember when I finally uh made it made it over the hump and said, you know what, I'm gonna start using the shopper. I'm gonna use that cart. And that was such a hard moment, and it took weeks of me, just fighting with it back and forth and saying, man, I'm not gonna be looking. Now I go in there, jump on right in and make sure it's charged, and I go.
Yeah.
Now I know that by using those
It's
things.
I went through the same thing, John. I mean, I like literally would I'd fight with myself, like, and I'd be using a shopping cart for like kind of as a walker, and I would make it through a grocery store, but I would struggle with it. And then I finally like the light went on in my head one day, and I'm like, you know what? I'm just gonna get on one of them scooters, and I don't give a shit anymore. And, it was like a light went off in my head. And, I look back at it now and I'm like, you wasted 2 years of your life by fighting the mobility aids. And I wish I would have just said, you know what, if I need them, I'm going to use them, because they're going to help me be more independent.
How true that is. That's a very true statement because I went from being a shopper that would go in there and go from point A to point B. I would always make it a point to say, walking with the purpose. Where you going? Walking with the purpose. Oh, I'm going to go pick milk. I'm this and this and this and plot it out. To now that I accepted that I need the support and I need the help to, well, the cart when I get in there and I shop. Now I travel the store. I'm going down these aisles that I normally would have gone down because I'm no longer tied to the part of saying A to B. I got to conserve the amount of energy that I'm expending, that I'm going shopping. It used to drain me so much. Now, uh, I not only enjoy it a little bit more because I'm not so concentrated on walking and making, making it across the store to now I'm like, okay, I'm getting everything I need. I didn't forget nothing because I'm like, all right, now I'm able to concentrate really on what I need. Because it was always like, oh, I forgot this and I forgot that. And does it really matter? It was all the way on the other side of the store. Now it's like, oh, yeah, I'll just
Yeah.
go there with the
Yeah.
cart.
Yeah.
And it's,
That helps our mental health. I mean,
yes,
because we want to be out there, and I know some people, they have start having problems with their mobility, and they right away they seclude themselves. And I just know, and I've been through it. I mean, I've been through, like I spent 2 years in my house because I lost my job, and I didn't want to go outside because I was struggling to walk. I didn't want to use a cane. It was a macho thing, a guy thing, whatever. A sign of weakness. I fought it so hard. But then when I finally gave in and said, you know what, I'm done. I want to be outside. I want to do things. And I finally just said, you know what, screw it. Let's just do it. And let's just live life and keep on plugging.
it's a interesting variation or distinction between I'm not interested now in the quantity of steps that I'm going from A to B. Now it's the quality. Now I'm able to travel down the store and do real shopping, and I just bare minimum and conserving and still ending up whooped at the end of the day and tired and spent. Now I'm able to be out there because you're right. We want to be out there. We want to be out there socializing as best we can, and it's understanding and accepting the help that is out there for us and for and for you in ourselves to say, man, uh, I'm going to be walking with the cane because I can prolong myself when doing so.
Yeah, absolutely, brother. Absolutely. Man, I love talking to you, John. If there's anything else that you would want to say that they're newer in their diagnosis like you are, you're a few years in, and they're here, they're listening to you. What would be your message to them to keep on fighting?
So the main purpose of my advocacy that I try to share is to you that's listening to this podcast, to your audience. I'm hoping to reach across all those people that are having difficulties with it, with finding out what all is going on and how this affects multiple sclerosis affects every aspect of our lives, of our mentality, everything. I remember going how dark it got. I remember how tough it is to try to deal with so many things. And it's in finding it was once I found a community, once I found this community, it's been so much. It's leaps and bounds difference. Yes, I still have my tough days, but now I have my support system. Yes, I have some days where I'm mental fog is at 100, but you know what? Now I have a support system that has, there to help me out and pull me out when I'm in my funk and stuff like that. And it's very much, I encourage each and every one of you that has been diagnosed or that is going through a similar situation to definitely seek out the support that's out there. It's men that are going through the situation that are not used to really talking and speaking on. There's definitely a community out there that's we're quick to wrap around the people that are, rally around the people that need our support. We're quick to also joke. We're quick to laugh. When was the last time that you allowed yourself to laugh?
Yep.
It's hard right now
Yeah.
when you're being diagnosed, but
Yeah.
we are out there. And,
Absolutely, man.
and yeah,
And I was just going to chime in with you, man. It is so important to laugh because if you don't laugh at yourself with this disease, you're going to have a rough time.
yes, you are. Yes, you are. And it's one of those things that I missed before before my diagnosis was the poker nights, the hanging out, the all that, all the camaraderie and everything that was going on. And this disease had isolated me to such a point where I didn't think that was the case. Brian, we've met on TikTok and we shared many laughs, we shared many tears, we shared many moments that I've seen it how instrumental it is and how impactful that is. And you that are listening to this podcast, I would wish to encourage you. Yeah, I'm on TikTok, John Core. Uh, Definitely reach out to me and to us, and we're here.
Yeah, absolutely, man. I'll put John's information in the description for his TikTok if you want to follow him. He's just an awesome dude. I really appreciate you, John, coming on and sharing your journey with me. If you want to follow me on TikTok, you can find me at MS Michigan Man 64. You can also find me on Instagram, MS Michigan Man 64, and I am on Facebook, Brian Wallace out of Brunswick, Ohio. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button, and I will talk to you later. MS Michigan Man 64, I am out.